All right. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to our Open Farm Days training. This one is the first one for us. So this is the first time we're going to be talking about insurance for ag tourism. We have been working with Perry Cramer for quite a number of years as part of Alberta Ag Societies, and NFP has been our insurer of choice. So I'd like to introduce Perry Cramer, and I'd also like to introduce Carol Bauk. I think I got that right. And they're going to talk to us about ag insurance for agritourism, about commercial liabilities, and lots of just different things about insurance. I think everyone's familiar where the chat function is for the Zoom calls. And Carol and Perry are willing to answer the questions as we flow. So please feel free to use that chat function, and we will get to your questions as we go through it. So I'd like to first pass it over to Perry, who's going to kick things off and talk a little bit about NFP and what they're doing for ag insurance.
Thanks for the intro, Tanis. I appreciate that. As she mentioned, yeah, I have been working with ag societies and agriculture insurance for 12 years now. We've been a sponsor of ACE and some of the work they've been doing for closer to 20 years. And if you've never seen NFP before, if that's a new logo that you've never heard of, that's very new to everybody. So previously Foster Park Brokers was our name. We're just in the middle of a rebrand, and we've hit the 1 year mark. So if you still see Foster Park Brokers around, NFP, we're all the same people. Carol and I have not changed. If you're familiar with some of our other staff, we're all the same people. We're still based in Edmonton, and other than a new name and maybe some new colors, not a lot has changed from our end. So the Foster Park name will have been completely removed by end of calendar year, and NFP is our new name. So if you're curious what NFP is, it's a larger brokerage. Gives us a lot more horsepower, and at the end of the day, though, really not much has changed. If you want to remember the acronym, it's New Foster Park. So see if I can skip the slides here. Yeah, so I wanted to, when we first started talking about this presentation, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing all angles of it. Well, we've been insuring Open Farm Days and the farms for a number of years. There's a big intersection here between your farm insurance or maybe your small business insurance and the coverage that we arrange through ACE on behalf of you as a farm or business owner. So there is some nuance. There is going to be some back and forth. So I thought it would be a great idea to bring in our farm specialist, and that's Carol. She leads our farm department for all of NFP in Western Canada. So she is an expert when it comes to farm insurance. She may not be your broker, but she can speak to a lot of the general coverages and some of the exclusions that might be in your farm insurance. So she can introduce herself here. Carol, did you want to just do a quick background on yourself?
Sure, thanks, Perry. So as I said, my name's Carol. I actually am originally from British Columbia, grew up on a mixed cattle and hay farm in British Columbia. And I'm going to date myself, but I've been working in the insurance industry for, I'm now in my 34th year. And I have dedicated myself to agriculture business. I felt there was a real need for brokers that specialize in just strictly agriculture. So that's what I work on. So I know the ins and outs, ups and downs, backwards, sideways with farm insurance, agriculture businesses. So we're hoping that today we can kind of go through that, kind of talk about the difference between the commercial insurance versus your farm insurance, and answer any questions that you have there.
Great. Yeah, and I'm Perry again, and my expertise has been less so on the farm side, more on the commercial and nonprofit sector. So that would include agricultural societies and other small businesses that are not farms. So there are some differences there that we'll go through. So I think we'll start with most of the farm insurance. And if you're not a farm owner, then this won't apply to you, but this would be anyone who's got a farm policy. So go ahead, Carol.
Okay. So what we're going to start talking about today is your farm liability. So I know that we have the open farm days, and there's been some questions and concerns about whether your current policy does cover you for those open farm days. Perry will talk about what our NFC policy covers for you through open farm days. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on the farm liability. So in my estimation, your farm liability is the most important piece of your whole farm package. Whether you're a hobby farmer, whether you're a large commercial farmer, it's all the same across the board. We purchase insurance to protect our assets. So the liability portion is the portion that covers you for if you're sued for property damage or bodily injury to a third party. You have to be negligent. So what we're doing when we purchase the liability is we're transferring our risk over to an insurance company. And we have to determine a limit of insurance that will be applicable to your operation. And once we paid that premium to the insurance company, we are then giving them the right to settle a lawsuit on your behalf within your policy limit. So what we're concerned about on the farm is that we are protecting you in the sense that we make sure we know your operations. We want to know what you're doing on that property so that we can adequately convey that information to the insurance company, and they can then decide how they're going to insure you, what they're going to do and not do. Now, with the farm liability, obviously there are a number of restrictions that come in there. So we have to be very clear to our broker, which then translates over to the insurance company as to what our operations are. So I did just kind of pull out one set of wording just so that I have it here. But the big thing that happens with farm liability is they'll have some exclusions. One of the biggest exclusions that occurs is equine liability. So if it's not declared on your insurance policy and the insurance company does not know that you have some form of equine operation on your premises, they can deny a claim. So we have to make sure that we're having that conversation with our broker to make sure they understand exactly what you're doing. All operations are important. The farm liability operates the same as a commercial liability policy, has some extensions. We're not going to get into those, but we want to make sure that we do have a true farm liability wording in place. So there are some insurance companies out there that will basically write you a farm policy, but they have a personal lines or a homeowner's liability wording, and they just say, yes, we're going to extend liability to your farming operations, but you're not getting the full-blown farm liability. So you need to know what your policy is covering you for on the liability side, so that we make sure that we've got the exceptions on there. So operations, size of operations, what type of animals or what kind of operations you're doing can all come into play when we're determining that liability. So it's just really important that we make sure we've got that commercial general farm liability wording, because it provides much broader wording than we have right now. And working with your broker, you can determine what kind of limit you want to have, but that's where we want to look at that. So sorry, I have to bounce between a couple of screens here. What I want to talk about a little bit today is some of the exclusions that are in the liability wording on the farm. So one of the first ones that I look at, just this one that I've pulled out. So an exclusion under the wording says that they exclude any passenger rides for compensation, such as hay rides, sleigh rides, and wagon rides, whether mobile or stationary. So that's our big concern when we come to an open farm day situation, is that people maybe want to, ride people around their farms to show them their operation. And this one wording specifically excludes that. So again, conversation with your broker. We want you to be making sure that you're having that chat with the broker so that Perry, your screen is showing there. So we want to make sure you're having that conversation with your broker so that they can then have chat with your insurance company to make sure that they are going to include those operations. And from past experience, if it's equine related, most of the companies are declining that. So if you're having a hay ride or a sleigh ride, they're going to decline that coverage for you. So then you need to look at getting maybe some special event liability in place or a specific equine policy. And I don't know whether, Perry, if you want to just jump in just a little bit on that, because we can do the special events on your side, right?
We can, yep. Special events they're a great way to, and we'll talk about special event liability and what that is and how it works. It's a great way to plug a hole that might be in another policy. If you're involved with an agricultural society, we see this often, or if you've ever had a wedding at a hall where they've asked you for special insurance, those are what we call special event liability policies, or special event insurance, host liquor liability. Our industry is very bad for having 5 names for the same thing. They're little tiny policies, usually for a specified period of time, for a very specific operation or a very specific exposure that we're trying to address. So something like a sleigh ride or fireworks, weddings, things like that might fall out of your standard business operations, your standard homeowners risk or farm risk. You can usually talk to your broker and obtain a special event liability policy. And these can be, they have their limitations, they have their own exclusions, of course, but if you're having that open dialogue with your broker of what the risk is, what you're trying to cover off, that's the best solution for some of these very specific risks that open farm days, there's going to be some of that happens, of course.
Thanks, Barry. So when we're talking the farm liability, I think we can just pop to the next slide here.
Yeah, Carol, I just see a couple questions I saw one here from Janina about golf carts. I don't know. Do you want to take that, Carol, or do you want me to?
Hey, hang on a second. I gotta get it up here.
There's a list of not included stuff. So that would be like a list of exclusions. On the farm side, Leona, there's going to be what they call common exclusions that is going to be pretty standardized across your farm insurance. Your best bet in terms of what's excluded is to talk to whoever's providing your farm insurance. I can give you a list of what's excluded under the open farm days policy, and we're going back and forth here, so it's a little bit confusing, so I apologize for that, but I do have a list of what's excluded under the open farm days policy. But in terms of your own farm insurance, you're either going to have to read your policy yourself, which is why they give you all the paper every year, or you can talk to your broker and say, what am I excluded for? Where are my boundaries? And they should be able to provide you with a list of exclusions. There's going to be some standard exclusions that apply, COVID, pollution, asbestos, some of these things that are not relevant, but you're probably looking for a list of something like motorized equipment or equine or wagon rides. And unfortunately, the insurance companies don't give you, the policyholder, a nice concise list. They rely on those complicated legal documents, which is what Carol's referring to as the wordings, which is the fine print. And you really need to have a good understanding of how that fine print applies. So we could probably come up with a list of standard exclusions that you're going to see. But unfortunately, that's not something that's just readily available that we could, cover off all 25 farm insurance companies in Canada. Each insurance company does sort of have their own flavor of exclusions.
Yeah, and here, I think that's what I'm coming back to. I'm just going to answer this golf cart thing. Golf cart is usually included in your liability wording, because it does not need to be licensed or registered. So, but if you've got a golf cart that you're transporting people around, or unfortunately what we're seeing a lot now is people have the side-by-sides and they want to be able to transport people in those, we again need to make sure that your insurance company is good with that. Because the side-by-sides, should have a plate on them, they could be excluded under the liability wording and it would have to be picked up under your auto policy then. And again, that discussion you go back to your broker on. When it comes to kind of usual exclusions, if it's not listed on what we call your declaration page as an operation, it's going to be excluded. So if you have not advised your broker that you're selling honey off of your farm, and you have someone comes to your farm to pick up honey and they are hurt, we could see a denial of a claim because that sale of honey has not been declared. So I think we just have to reiterate that we want to be really clear with what you're telling your broker, what your operations are. As soon as you have any livestock animals on your property, then that is a big exposure risk to the insurance companies. And unfortunately, they feel that the equine portion of it is a higher liability risk. So we do see a lot of equines on that side that they won't extend coverage to, pony rides, those kinds of things. And I've actually got about 4 files on my desk right now that I'm working on for like petting zoo type operations. Again, as long as we're really clear to our underwriters, we can usually get something in place for you. But, when you're inviting people onto your premises, we just need to make sure that you're covered off properly and that someone does get hurt. So I just want to make sure there's no more questions here.
Yeah, there's a few there. The list of open farm day exclusions, I have those actually in this presentation.
Okay.
We'll go through that and I can circulate that around. We can talk about them all today as well. There's a few definitely to be aware of. And Tanis, yeah, I can send you that. It's in the presentation. If you want more details on them, I can certainly provide those. Anton, if you're having a difficulty finding farm insurance, the 25 companies, that's just, Perry throwing a number out there. I don't know, Carol, how many farm insurers do we have?
Well, we probably in our usual markets, we've got about a dozen right now that we work with, but we have a lot of other companies that will write pieces of farm insurance if you're having difficulties. So I would suggest that you reach out, Anton. We can have a chat, see where you're having those difficulties. I'm just going to say that if you're in a small town, you might have a little bit of a difficulty because your small town broker maybe only has a contract with a couple of companies. They don't have access to a lot of the markets that we do. So NFP is a big player in the insurance world. So we have access to markets that a lot of companies don't have access to. So just to answer that, Anton, if you just reach out, we can kind of touch base and see what we can come up with. But Perry, if we want to just kind of move on to the next slide. So I just want to have just a quick little chat about liability limits to make sure that you understand where you should be. So in today's marketplace and with the settlements that we've seen happen across the board with farm insurance, and not just farm insurance, just as a general rule with any liability claims that are coming through, we're seeing that settlements are just going higher and higher and higher and higher. So right now, we consider a $2 million limit to be a base limit in the marketplace. So, 20 years ago, maybe that was $500,000, then it kind of crept up to $1 million. Now we feel that $2 million is our base limit. So you should have at least a $2 million limit on your policy right now. We don't want to ever see someone have to sell their entire farm to, buck up the money if they don't have adequate limits in their liability portion. So most commercial businesses and farms carry a minimum of $5 million and higher. And in the grand scheme of your whole insurance policy, when you're looking at going from that $2 million to a $5 million limit, it's a very, very, very minor increase in premium. So I'm seeing large farming operations moving into the $10 million plus range, just because they want to make sure that they're 100% protecting their assets. So just as a little kind of information point to you, I'm actually working on a claim right now, a liability claim where one of my farmers has been sued, and the third party, the claimant, is actually requesting $4.8 million in the law. So that just shows, I mean, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen at this point, but just so you can see that we're creeping up to that $5 million mark at that point on HIT. So we want to make sure when you talk to your broker that we're protecting your physical assets, your house, your outbuildings, equipment, that kind of thing, but we're also wanting to protect you on that liability side so that when you're sued, you're not selling the farm literally to satisfy that farm. And again, your operations can determine that, the size of your operations, how many acres you own. Unfortunately, in today's society, we see people that, have grown up in downtown Edmonton, for example, in a condominium, and they perceive anybody that owns land to be rich. So we're seeing these requests for higher limits due to that, because we don't want you to sell the farm off. I think that's kind of it on that one, Perry, if you want to move on to the next one.
So this one, these are some of the common questions that we get, and Carol's going to do her best here to sort of answer the questions from a general perspective. Now, it is difficult for us to speak in black and white terms because every farm insurance company is slightly different with their wordings. It's going to be a little bit, of a generic statement. We do have to put the caveat out there. Please talk to your farm insurance broker for the absolute gospel truth on these ones. But Carol has, she's very familiar with all of the different insurance companies that we work with. But there are insurance companies that don't use a broker to deliver their products to the marketplace. So other insurance companies like cooperators or things like that, they don't allow a broker to use their product. So we can't comment on how those other businesses might work. So we do have to put that caveat out there.
Okay, so just some of these common questions. First one, are the products offered by my farm covered by my farm liability? So this goes back to my comment earlier that if you have provided your broker with your operations and what you're doing, general rule of thumb is there's usually about $10,000 coverage for your products themselves. And as long as you declare what you're doing, then the liability is going to be covered. So I'm going to go back to my beekeeper, for example. So I've got a beekeeper and he has a little market garden. He sells honey out of his market stand at his farm. As a general rule of thumb, as long as that operation has been declared to the insurance company, you're covered. So there's going to be some product liability covered in there as well, but usually a very small amount. So hopefully that answers that question on that side. Again, we have to be very upfront when we're explaining to our broker what we do. It's easy to say I need a farm policy because I sell some vegetables in the summer, but then you fail to say I make jams, I make jelly, I produce honey, those kind of things. So we need to make sure that your broker is well aware of what you're doing. So the next question that commonly gets asked is, does my farm policy cover my spouse or my child with their little startup business? And that is a no. That's just the easiest way to say it. So our farm policies are very specific in the operations that they're covering you for. So if all of a sudden we have your spouse decides that they're going to start selling Tupperware from the home, those kind of things, it must be declared. It has to be declared to the insurance company, and just that was a very small. But if your spouse is selling Tupperware from the farm, we can usually extend liability to them. They don't have a problem with that, but again, we have to declare it. So no, it doesn't automatically cover you, but depending on what you're actually doing or what your spouse or your child is doing, we could potentially pick up that liability for you. And I know Perry and I are just going to sound like we're just repeating ourselves over and over again, but you need to have those conversations with your broker. That's what we're here for. That's why you deal with a broker, so that we can then pass along, your information to the insurance companies, so the insurance companies can evaluate the risk and decide if they're going to carry on or not. I just see, would it be beneficial to have people sign waivers? So Perry can jump in here after me, but I'll just have my little. It is beneficial, But we just have to be really careful with it. I would suggest if you're going to have a waiver that you have it done up through a lawyer, but lots of times that can get thrown out in court. So one of the big things that I am concerned about with waivers, and I can't remember the exact date this happened, but there was a lawsuit where a child was injured, the parent had signed the waiver, and then when the child became an adult, they actually sued the parent because the parent didn't have the right to sign the waiver on their behalf. Perry, do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Think
Yeah.
still I don't know whether it's finalized in the court, but at least if you've got the waiver, the unfortunate thing is that most people just sign them and don't read them. So, it's kind of become a standard thing that people just quickly sign their name on a waiver just to get to the gate kind of thing. So, yes, it helps you to a point, but we know that there's issues when it comes to court on that.
Yeah, if you want, I can chime in a little bit on waivers. We get this question quite a bit dealing with agricultural societies and waiver usage. We do recommend using waivers. It does depend, MJ, on exactly what you're trying to ask somebody to waive their rights in. So this could be, I don't know if you're talking about a wagon ride or something else, but there's certain things where we can't ask somebody to waive their rights to sue. If it's too inherently dangerous, like let's say, I can't think of an example right now, but there's situations where we still need to provide a duty of care, right? If you're going to go bungee jumping and you sign a waiver and they don't attach the bungee cord, that waiver is not going to do much because they still have an obligation to keep you safe, right? So just because somebody signed a waiver, it doesn't necessarily mean we can really change how we're operating things. Whether that waiver works in court or not is very difficult to say. Alpacas, okay. Yeah, I would. So is this a petting zoo then with the alpacas, or is this or this looks like maybe it's riding? I don't know. Can you ride an alpaca? I've never seen.
No, Perry,
This is a petting zoo, right?
MJ, can I just jump in here a minute? So you have alpacas sitting on someone, that's not going to be an issue. But if someone is on your premises, you've invited them onto your premises, whether it's to come and view your alpacas or to walk around the field with them and interact with them. Again, we just have to make sure that we've got adequate liability in place and that your broker or that your insurance company understands from your broker what you're actually doing. And the fact that when you're inviting those people onto your premises, you have that duty of care. So if they're out in your field, for example, interacting with your alpacas, you have to make sure that there's no dangers that someone could potentially be hurt that is not a normal. If I'm out hiking and I slip on a rock and I sprain my ankle, that's one thing. But if we have an open well out in the field that hasn't been capped off, or you've taken the cap off and not put it back on and haven't advised, then that's a different situation.
Yeah. So for this, I mean, feeding them carrots and treats, we're not going to use a waiver in that situation. There's not an inherent risk or danger. I mean, there are risks, of course, but we're not asking a athletic participant to waive their rights because they're taking part in a dangerous activity. So for the alpacas, if they bite or spit or someone, if they hurt somebody, you still have to do your due diligence. So if these animals are known to bite or spit or something, you might want to post some signage regarding that. And if we know that these animals are biting, you need to have fencing, maybe have a second layer of fencing. If we know that kids are always putting their hands through, you do need to show that you've done your due diligence to prevent an injury from happening. A waiver in this situation is not going to be a good tool because by getting someone to sign a waiver, you're telling them that they can't pursue you in court for the injuries that they've sustained. And in this situation, the waiver is going to be thrown out anyway. So even if you wanted to use it, it's not the right tool to use here. So if there are some inherent dangers, signage, prevention, safety guards, fencing, I mean, your operation best. Waiver's the wrong tool here.
Correct. So MJ, I'm just going to point out just a couple things that we have used on our as a tool on our farms, and it goes back to what Perry's saying. So the first thing that I would suggest is the signage. The big thing is signage. So you make sure that you have like some rules as to, you know, how things are done on the farm. Clear signage of where people can and cannot be, and that will help you out. Fencing that keeps people out of areas that you don't want them to be in. So you just want to make sure that when you're inviting those people onto your premises, you're doing what you can to keep them safe, and whether it's by, you know, notifying them via that sign or doing double fencing, those kind of things. And obviously, if they're feeding the alpacas, are you instructing them how to feed them, you know, to hold their hand out, you know, flat, those kind of things. And consistency is the key here. So if you can say, I do this with every one of my visitors that comes on my premise, this is what we go through. We go through a list of rules of how you handle the animals, what you can and can't do, and you can consistently say, I do this all the time. It's going to look good in your favor for that. So just a little bit on that. I do see another question come up here. Pasture tours where people can walk among the cows. Need to know if they okay, so MJ, that's great. So that's you're staying with those people. You're making sure that they're interacting properly with the alpacas. Again, if there is an incident that happens, I would suggest that you're doing an incident report right away. Who was there, name people, those kind of things. Just keep that in a logbook if you have to, just in case something else does come up. So I just want to go back to this, Leona. You're talking about pasture tours where people can walk around cows. So that's going to go back to no different than the alpacas. So again, you need to be keeping your invitees onto your farm safe. So you are not going to be allowing people to walk through a field where you know that there are cows that are going to be a little bit nasty. Obviously, we probably don't want them in a field with a bunch of bulls. You know, and what are you doing to prevent potential injury? You know, so when they're walking around those cattle with these pasture tours, are there specific routes that you take all the time to maybe avoid some instances where, you know, you might be crowding cattle into a corner somewhere that they then are going to react? So again, we want to make sure that we're safe on those premises. We want to make sure you're doing everything you can, you know, and again, what rules have you set in place for those invitees when they come onto your property? That, okay, we've got 6 people that are going to come out and do that tour on the farmland with you. You know, we're going to encounter cattle at some point. What are you doing to make sure that they stay safe? So I hope that answers that question there. Perry, I think I'm just going to move on, and then if we have more questions, come back to that after. But
sure, I think it's my slide next. So is there anything else you wanted to touch on before I sort of?
Just a couple things. So we've already touched on this a little bit, but you know, rides on farm machinery, sleigh rides, those kind of things. So again, I'm going to tell you that it's not necessarily going to be a hard no, but I think we're going to look at it being a no to have rides on farm machinery, to have, you know, the sleigh rides, those kind of things. I would be sure as heck checking with my broker before I offered any of that. I think on the farm machinery, it's probably going to be a definite hard no, but the wagon rides and sleigh rides can probably talk to that up. And then I'll throw it over to you, Perry.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, so I'll just start quickly here, just with a quick overview between the sort of behind the scenes on insurance policies and how they're structured. There's 2 different types of policies that I can provide to you as a broker for your business. And this is, you know, whether we're talking about something related to your farming operation or something where the business has gone a little bit more commercial. So you can buy a commercial general liability policy, which is, again, it's an annual policy to protect all aspects of your business operations. So there's going to be a point where your farm insurance is no longer sufficient, where you've moved into a more commercialized operation, and you may want to look at a general liability policy, because sometimes there's going to be some added benefits that we can sort of piggyback onto that general liability policy. If you own a small business, or if you're part of an agricultural society, this is your small business liability policy. And there are some differences between that and an event policy or a special event liability. So those are the short-term policies. Again, we talked about they're used to plug those holes. This is what we use for open farm days. It's an event liability policy. So it's specific for open farm days, purchased as a group. As you can see the pricing there, we have to keep it in mind. We have to make this event affordable, and we're always weighing that with, what event or what exposures are we trying to insure against, right? So the cost is very low. I'm not even sure exactly how this is charged back. That's not up to me, but that's as competitive as we can get. $65. You can't get much nowadays for $65. So it is purchased as a group because we have all the farms working together. And it will specifically cover the open farm days, but there are exclusions. So I just wanted to sort of lay the groundwork on what we're providing. We're not insuring open farm days throughout the entire year. It's a very specific to the event. So we have very specific dates that the event liability applies to. Usually we tack a couple days on before or after in case there's some setup, or maybe something gets protracted, and then we have people back a next day. So we usually add a couple extra days on each end, and we do have a very specific list of locations. So Tanis and her team compile a list of all of the farms. You need to be on that list. Make sure you're registered. Make sure it's done in advance, preferably. And if your neighbor wants to just decide to open up his farm for open farm days the day of, something like that, if he's not listed on that policy, there won't be any coverage for him. It's a very specific list of locations for the special event policy. And okay, here's the questions that are the final slide, I guess, on what's covered, what's not covered. So I can share this later, you can look at it later, but in general, we're protecting all of your farms. And again, the host facilities, some of these events are not happening at farms. So we need a schedule of all the locations. Those are what we're insuring against. And oftentimes you're going to already have farm insurance, and the open farm days policy sort of is what we call a contingent layer, which is in excess of your farm policy, or it could plug some holes. And we don't mesh the policies at the time. The way it works is we provide the policy regardless of whether you have farm insurance or small business insurance in place as a primary layer. If there is a claim, the adjusters from both insurance companies would coordinate who is going to respond. And there is going to be some overlap. In general, your farm insurance is going to be primary. So that's going to be the first policy we try to make the claim under. And you need to be aware of that. Even if it is open farm days, your farm policy is the primary policy. This is a contingent policy we're providing through open farm days. And that's how we're able to get the pricing so low, because we know that the majority of farms are insured, right? We can't guarantee they're all insured, but we know that they do have likely some insurance somewhere. But you may have a liquor exclusion. You may have an exclusion for products that you're selling. You may have a designated operations exclusion that we're not aware of. So this policy has been arranged to protect not only the farms, but as well as ACE and anyone else who's affiliated with this event. If anybody gets hurt at the farm, if we make somebody sick with the food product we're selling, or if we accidentally damage somebody's property, this could be snow, or I guess not snow, it's in August. If something happens where we accidentally cause damage to somebody's car that's parked in our field, an animal gets loose and decides to go put its horns through a bunch of cars in the parking lot, something like that, or maybe a machine. We had a volunteer driving a tractor. He didn't know how to. I think he could only get it in reverse, didn't know how to use the brakes, and he actually hit a few cars in the parking lot. Stuff like that, accidental property damage, $2 million per claim. And this would be, for any of those bodily injury property damage claims. So we include food coverage, beverage sales, including liquor. Liquor is covered as well. Medical payments are an important one to have in there. We always put that in there. Somebody does get hurt, don't hesitate, phone the ambulance, get a paramedic or EMT out there. The cost of that will be insured. And, yeah, don't ever hesitate to provide them that medical assistance that they need. Your insurance policy will cover it. So the list of exclusions, the way insurance companies work is they say everything's covered except for this list of exclusions. So here's a list of common exclusions. So trampolines and inflatable amusement rides. So these are bouncy castles. We get this call all the time. It's not that this insurance is unavailable. It is available. It's expensive. And if we wanted to say, we have 125 farms that are doing bouncy castles, your price is going up perhaps 300% because those devices, as fun as they are, and my kids love them, they do unfortunately result in a disproportionate number of claims. So if there is an injury, we're on the hook for that. Communicable disease exclusion, COVID-19 and BSE. These are two that we see. The wordings on these have gotten a little bit beefier, no pun intended, over the last couple of years because of COVID. And basically there is no insurance coverage for either BSE or COVID-19 or any other communicable disease, but those are obviously the two that we need to be the most aware of. Mechanical rides exclusion. Again, coverage is available for this. We don't automatically include it in open farm days because of that affordability piece. So combine rides, tractor rides, anything that's a mechanical device, we've seen riding, or those mechanical bulls, those are so much fun. Not insured automatically under the open farm days policy. So if you have one of those toys, or if you really have a fun old tractor that you want to, let the kids ride on, it's not insured. This would not apply to something that's not motorized. So I think Carol and I had a conversation about like a parked tractor. If it's, been rendered inoperable, those old machines, they're fun to sit on, the kids can take photos on them. We have no concerns with that. That's absolutely fine. It's the actual motorized component. As soon as it's motorized, there is no coverage in there. As fun as those little wagon rides are, and you probably have them, the little carts behind the tractor. I'm not telling you not to do these things. I'm just telling you it's not automatically insured by the open farm days policy. So if you have one of those toys or wagons that you want to take people around on, go talk to your broker, talk to your farm insurance broker and let them know. So there are some carve backs for the mechanical rides, things like people operating like ATVs, or if you're driving the tractor, right? If you're operating the tractor and you cause damage to somebody with that machine, there is coverage for the bodily injury or property damage, or a golf cart, right? Things like that, where you're operating the machine and it causes damage to a third party, that's covered. It's the actual participants, the people that are riding on that machine. If they sustain an injury, then there is no coverage for that. Fireworks, pyrotechnics, again, it's available, not automatically included because of the cost. And abuse, you can buy abuse insurance. Wouldn't recommend it for this operation at all, but again, it's a standard exclusion, and then the standard GL exclusions, which are terrorism, asbestos, and nuclear. So another thing that we didn't really touch on too much here is the equine. We get a lot of questions about horses and the different ways that we can interact with the animals. This is something that it's ever changing. The insurance companies presently are not a big fan of anything related to equine. And unfortunately, this is stemming from a couple class action lawsuits or significant lawsuits from in Ontario, where we had some whether it was I think there was one involving a clinic. It was a clinic where they were teaching kids to ride horses, and there was some injuries that happened. Insurance companies are kind of like sheep. Once one sees a big lawsuit, the others tend to spook as well. So the insurance companies right now are in a state where most of them are freaked out about anything related to equine. It's making a big challenge for us for sleigh rides, wagon rides. So far, the rough stock guys are actually doing okay. We can get rodeos and things like that, PBR, running of the bulls. We can get those events covered. But unfortunately, equine is something that's very challenging. So if you do have a specific concern with equine and you want to offer that, phone me, phone Carol, and say, look, I want to give people. I have a sleigh ride. I want to do it. what's the most affordable way to do it. And we do have solutions. We can do it. It is just something we can't unfortunately provide on a blanket basis to all farms, because the quote we got was not worth not worth sharing. It was extremely expensive. So there are a handful of exclusions. So I don't see any new questions popping up here, but if there's something on your mind, feel free to share it before we wrap up here. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Looks like we've got about 12 minutes left. For castles or equine, so like a bouncy castle or equine, yeah. So it depends on what you mean by equine. Like so bouncy castles are actually pretty affordable if you wanted to have a bouncy castle at your farm for open farm days for 2 or 3 days. I think the pricing is around $300-400 per farm, which is not insignificant. But if you can imagine multiplying that by 120 farms, the number gets pretty big pretty quick. So that's what standalone bouncy castles. A lot of these providers, though, you know, if they will come and set up the bouncy castle, they'll often have their own insurance, but it does not often help the farm itself. So keep in mind on these situations, you need to be negligent in order for you to be successfully sued. But if it's taking place on your property, even if the bouncy castle operator has insurance, you're likely going to be named as a co-defendant in that lawsuit. So you do want to do your due diligence and talk to your broker what the cost of that might be. Equine, it really depends. Are we talking about like just a horse ride or trail ride or something more like a riding clinic or school? I don't know.
I will say for open farm days, the biggest request that we get is people that want to do wagon rides. So
yeah.
It's not about riding or anything else. It's strictly pulling the wagon.
Yeah. I wish I had a really great product to sell you. I wish I know if me and Carol set the prices, you know, we maybe we should start our own insurance company. That's what we should do. So as a broker, you know, we're sort of at the mercy of the insurance marketplace. And I just arranged it's sleigh ride season. I mean, that's what's happening right now across the province. Everyone's doing sleigh rides. And the last price I saw was about $1,400 for a 1-day sleigh ride. And
wow.
It's not great news, unfortunately. So we're working on it is the best I can say. We're trying to find a way to package all of our clients together to pitch it to an insurance company to say, you know what, insuring one sleigh ride is not, it's not in their interest, to put it that way, because they are putting up a potential $2 million pot and they only can charge you $1,200, right? So if this was your money, right? If you had the big pockets, like an insurance company, what would you want to charge somebody that you've never met to run a sleigh ride? So they're concerned with a sleigh ride about a mass casualty event, right? It's extremely rare. I've never even heard of it happening. These animals are usually so well trained in what they do, but they're concerned that it's not just one person on a horseback. It's usually 20 people on a sleigh or a wagon, whatever it is. And they're concerned about both pulling horses spooking and the whole wagon tipping and having a mass casualty event. So unfortunately, that's the best pricing we've come up with. And again, I as a group, you know, NFB is a big company. We've got 1,000 employees here in Canada. We're trying to find a solution, but as it stands right now, the insurance companies are very skittish about wagon rides. Horses in a corral, on foot next to each child on a horse. Tractor pulling, yeah, tractor pulling wagon. That would probably be, it can't be more than equine, put it that way. I haven't done a tractor pull for a wagon in a while, but yeah, I think we could probably get placed for less than that for a special event policy. So if you're doing some of these things, the suggestion, Leona, is to get your own special event policy or talk to your farm insurance provider and say, hey, this is what I want to do. And they can usually figure out a solution, but we're not going to be providing it to every farm on open farm days because of the cost. We've got a budget in mind here. So horse rides in a corral, yeah, that's something that we could look at for sure. I don't want to comment on that one specifically, but yeah, because of how skittish the insurance companies are with equine, I'd want to get it directly from the underwriter on that type of a horseback riding event. And each year, I will mention that, we negotiate these terms every single year. And while Open Farm Days has never, we've had a few incidents over the years. We haven't had any big payouts. There hasn't been any big claims. There have been a couple little bumps, nothing significant that would result in millions of dollars being spent. But it is something we negotiate every year. And we are trying to, gain some leverage with the insurance companies to get them to give us more coverage for less money or even the same money. And that is something that we work on each year. So.
All right, wonderful. If we don't have any more questions, what I will do is follow up with some of these ones that we've had to see if we can just get even some ideas of what quotes might be, and then we can put all of this information again on the back end. So if you look for that, you will find it within the week up on the Open Farm Days website, and feel free to send any questions my way, and or reach out directly to Perry and Carol. This is what they do. So they're probably happy to field your questions about your own insurance policies, whether it's your special event ones or your commercial farm ones. Thank you so much for joining us.
I just want to throw just a quick little thing in here. Perry and I do insurance all across the province. So don't think that if because you're in Lethbridge that we potentially couldn't help you out. We both travel all over. So just so you know that we're not just an Edmonton-based company. We do myself personally, I insure all the way across the Western provinces. So please reach out if you do have any questions. I'm always willing to look at what you've got and maybe give you some suggestions as to potentially how you could talk with your current broker.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for putting this together for us. We really, really appreciate it, and your information and insight. It gives us lots of time to make sure we're getting our farms all set up for next year. So thank you. And again, your contact informations are in the chat function. If you need them again, you can get them from me. And then the one pager will have their contact information as well. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Bye-bye.